today we wanted to talk about, there were some more things on narrative, and we did send out kind of these questions, and these weren't very particular questions. They're more kind of general to get the brain going. But before we get into questions about narratives and about responses to narratives, one thing I have been picking up lately that I just wanted to, is kind of like a PSA. This was about mindfulness. And I found that this really helps in determining why I should even care about thinking about narratives. So one of the cores of mindfulness, and it's a broad topic, but it's kind of like, what do you actually have connection to and power over? So there's three areas of that, of what do you have control over? Well, really, you only have control over your own thoughts, words, and deeds. That's what you have control over. Now you have influence over other people. You can ask them to consider your thoughts, words, and deeds, but you can't control them to do it. And then there are the things, and then everything else. So it's like what you can do, who and what you can influence, and everything else. And like going through those steps, it really points out, okay, these giant national narratives of the left versus right and all these things, like, what does that in actuality have to do with me and my next act? Like, how do it becomes a little distant. And the thing I'm trying to do right now is, okay, no, it's still important to think about national things, because there are a lot of things that need national solutions, but I don't need to be as upset about them as I get. And I do want to influence other people's opinions, but I don't need to be as upset about it if they don't do it my way. Like, what I really need to be upset about is if I think about all these things, but I don't go volunteer somewhere. That's what I should be upset about. So that was the kind of little quick PSA about mindfulness. And before I get into the first question, does anybody else study mindfulness? No?
I haven't approached it under that terminology, but I think the idea of, think globally, act locally is another way of saying it. And it's for instance, what can I do regarding environmental degradation? Well, try not to drive so much. Figure out ways to not consume any more than you need. So yeah, I think it applies well to consumption of news, and that's probably something I need to be more aware of as well. Is that I get upset about things. Ted Cruz has no part in my life. I don't know why I should bother spending time thinking about what he's doing. But yeah, I think that's a good preface. I would like for you to define, as you get started, I'd like for you to define the two terms for me. The one is the narrative, maybe so we're all on the same starting point. Define that. And you mentioned also the carrot and stick, and I wasn't quite sure of that. So why don't you?
Well, Andrew, you were about to chime in too.
Yeah, just briefly, it was interesting to see you talk about mindfulness in this way, because my work, I'm a restorative justice practitioner in a community setting in South Side of Chicago, and mindfulness. We do circles. We gather people in circle, not during the pandemic. Now it's all on screens, but hopefully someday again we'll be gathering in circle. But mindfulness is a practice that's frequently used in circle, just for folks to kind of center themselves, to be fully present. And so I think there's a real connection to what Dustin laid out for us, in terms of mindfulness in this respect, but it's very connected to other efforts that are going on all over for folks to get focused, get centered, be fully present. That's all. Thanks.
It's hard to learn. I don't know if you could put a time. How long does it take for that to click, or is it a lifetime? Yeah. So, first question here is, I'm just going to ask it because I kind of want to see what an initial question is, and then I'll get a kind of definition. But one of the phrase that keeps popping up in my head is the narrative is the most powerful thing in society. And I'll define that in a minute, but when I say the narrative is the most powerful thing in society, what does that mean? What is your initial reaction to that statement at large? Just real quick. And nothing, and I don't know is an answer to.
The way I'm hearing it is, it's almost like your self-talk, but in your sense, it's somebody defining that for you, putting into your head a certain set of assumptions that you may or may not agree with. And I'll mention this, Andrew. These guys have heard me talk about this many times, and I don't know what your feelings are about it, but I have had difficulty in discussion with liberal friends, discussions about race, because in my opinion, race is a falsehood. It's not a real thing. It's something we made up. And the response I get from many of them is, well, you're just avoiding the question. You're trying to, dodge the issue of justice and fairness and the history of oppression and all that stuff. No. What I want to do is have people not focus on that anymore. And the example I always give is, when I was growing up in a Catholic school, our teachers drew a strong division between left-handed kids and right-handed kids. Everybody knew who the left-handed kids were and who the right-handed kids. And it created this dynamic in the classroom about who's on which side. And that all disappeared. People quit thinking about that. I don't know who's left-handed and right-handed anymore. And I'd like to see the same thing happen with race. I don't want that to happen. So the narrative, if I'm on target here, Dustin, the narrative that I live in is that race is real, and I'm white and somebody else is black, and I fall into a certain category. And it's, I see that narrative being forced on me, and it's really difficult to get outside it. Am I on?
Yeah.
I'm on the
Absolutely on the right track. Another example is let the market sort it out is another narrative, and that's an understanding that that's the best way and it will work and something will get sorted, and like this faith we have in how the world works is that, and what we're doing is the right, like that kind of narrative. Now I get pretty specific, where that phrase to me reminds me of why I increasingly am hesitant about corporate news, because I'm understanding, once I started learning about omission, then it started clicking, where it's like the corporate news can give you facts and they can give you context, and that greater context over time is that narrative. But what we're not seeing is what they're not showing us. So if they're only talking about the market solution and they don't even mention the social solution, there's the reason for that. And it's their reason, not mine. So if you dominate the conversation, and what I'm trying to say is, like, the news media may even be more powerful over our lives as a dominating force than a stock market or a military. It's very easy to say, well, the people with the guns forcing me to do something. Of course, I'm not in that position, so who am I to talk? Like, if somebody put a gun in my face, I'd be like, well, that's more important than the newscaster thing. But anyway, the big thing is, like, you don't have to control the military and you don't have to control the stock market. It's better if you do. The thing you have to control is the media, if you want to be the authoritarian, is what I'm saying. So that's when I hear the narrative is the most powerful thing in society, is the first thing before we get new Congress people and before we kick the money out of the military is we have to get rid of the bad narrative influencers. By that I mean the corporate news. That's my opinion of what it is, and people will have different opinions. But this comes back to it. I concentrate on how does the corporate media weaponize narratives, and then people kind of get where I'm going. But I guess I can rephrase the question of, if you were an authoritarian, which would you prefer to have? You had to pick one. Would it be controlling the media, controlling the stock market, or controlling the police? Which would, if you, to be an authoritative, which one would you pick?
Is that the question you want?
That's the question. Yeah. Yeah. I'm changing my question a little bit.
All right. I think the whole notion of narrative is exactly what we're doing here. Subset, we're doing a small version of that. We're influencing 4 people here. And I got that. I do that fairly often with people, and usually by referring to some book, someplace that I've read or something I read online, and a brief explanation why I think what it is worth their time to read it. But mostly I don't, because I find people that are close to my age don't want to think about anything different. Hard to say, but there you go. Don't want to think about anything new. They just think about what's going on now. And of course, the most immediate thing of, well, am I going to die tonight because of the COVID virus? Or am I going to freeze to death? And if you want a really interesting thing to talk about, that problem of why that happened, that whole business with water in Texas was a direct result of the economic system at work, making the most money that they can possibly make off of the water system. And unfortunately, in the process, it was set up so that it was bound to have a serious collapse at some point, and a whole lot of water prices go through the roof. I mean, $10,000 for a day's worth of water is crazy.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, that's what they charged this woman. I mean, it was just, even the national news is like, oh, look at this. She's got this bill from the water company. It's $10,000 for a day's worth of water. That's because they set the system up, and it's the same system that brought down Enron. The same kind of method that, where you tinker with it so that you get a steady flow of money and don't worry too much about a real collapse or a real disaster that would really have a big influence on it. And of course, in the case of Enron, collapsed, and all of the stocks or the packages of stocks that they had cooked up suddenly went blunk. And the same thing happens here, where the water supply suddenly goes from this outrageous. I mean, $600. It's not 10,000 is insane to think about. $600 for a day's worth of water. People, and of course they're out chasing water trucks and people with water, trying to get water because they got no water. And and of course the boys that did it, and they're like, oh well, we'll fix that. Don't you worry, none. And it's like, no, it is there now, and regardless of once you fix it, it'll come right back, because it's set up to make money for you instead of instead of making water available to everybody. I mean, there's several subsets to it, including the one about, hey, we're from Texas, we don't need any help from our government, even though, the whole thing's gone down the tubes. So, and that one strikes me as like, okay, there's your narrative that was set up. Hey, we can deliver water at a much cheaper price for you. How about doing that? But we can't cook up to the water line or power line in the country because, they might tell us what to do. That's what it was, Well, they can't do that. Yeah, sure enough. They've already, I mean, I already see some Texas-based government officials, hollering for the government to come bring some help in here, get the PETA people in here and fix this up.
That's how I always combat that narrative, where I was talking a couple weeks ago about NAFTA, and we're like, yeah, you can get cheaper prices on this right now, but you realize it's going to make it more expensive. Like if you don't have labor protection, like if you don't do these things, it's actually not cheaper.
No.
It's in the long run, it's not. And this was combating that narrative, like, well, the corporate way is the better way. And I'm like, well, we're not a corporation, we're a country. So
No, we're not. We're a state.
Oh yeah, we're state.
Sorry.
So
That's even more different there, you know.
I do like what you say about like most people don't want to think about anything different kind of thing. And one of the traps that I've gotten into, and this happens after every election cycle, and it's happening now in the I'm waiting for the light. I was about to say post-Trump, but I'm waiting for the lightning. Was that I saw more people got seemingly interested. And maybe it wasn't interested. Maybe it was just they were threatened because some crazier than normal crap was happening. And now they're kind of veering. They're going back to brunch, basically. And I was getting my hopes up. Like this happened in Bernie 2016, and it happened during Trump. I was like getting my hopes up that more people were going to watch the news, like I did. But now that we're going back to brunch, then they're not. So I'm like, I was mistaking the concern and the sensation of it all with a possible segue to actual activism. And I was letting myself believe that it was going to be simple and not remembering that it's the same struggle that I've had for 40 years in nonprofit work to get anybody to do anything. It just felt like maybe my prospect pool was larger this time because everybody was tuning in. And what I'm finding is it's not. It's the same. It's the four of us, and everybody else went back to.
Well, I don't know. You know, maybe one or two. Our friend Kyle he's a prison activist, I guess we would call that. And he wrote a book on Kentucky prisons, which are horrible places to be, you know. And if you look back in their history, they've always been that way. They were built to extract money from the black prisoners left over from the Civil War, pure and simply. You know, he's got all this documentation. This is what he did. And yet he worked in the system for a long time, very long time. And it was only when he retired that he finally decided he should at least put some of that knowledge to work out there in the world. And so he has. I don't know if it's made any difference, but it certainly is the case that the Kentucky prison system is a wreck, even now.
On the Texas thing, on just the current news, are we hearing narratives about, well, maybe we shouldn't privatize everything, or is the narrative Texans are dumb and Republicans are dumb? Like, are we hearing any anti-capitalist narratives in?
Well,
I haven't seen anybody out there saying, you know, we should not let them get a hold of the water, except a few, and they're more just, you know, it's kind of like, oh, can we say this? We don't really want to, you know, take all the water. But, you know, to come in and say, okay, look, the problem is caused by X, Y, and Z, and it's corporations who got the water and they control the water and they've set it up so that they can make money out of it, and you're going to be screwed the next time you get a big storm or some kind like this. And no, we'll fix it. That's their main thing. We'll fix it.
Yeah.
One of the things that came home to me, and this is something I credit to Donald Trump, the first person out of the gate usually gets to set the narrative. Now, this time I heard Rick Perry, who is, of course, the genius on all things energy, talking about, well, this shows you that the Green New Deal just can't work. Now, I think that narrative got shut down pretty quickly, but it was only shut down on the left-leaning and the centrist news. On the right-wing news, they're taking it, you know, that's their narrative. Well, we had a power problem. Well, you can't have, you know, solar power when it's cloudy, and you can't use windmills when they freeze up. So the narrative is often about who gets there first, who gets to define it. Now, Newt Gingrich, a long time ago, he is one responsible. Trump did it because he used the media. He used Twitter as a way to get out there first. You know, before people heard the news from anywhere else, they heard it directly from him, and he could define it for them.
It was game changing.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He's, you know, he understood that media the way Kennedy understood television, the way Hitler understood radio. It's you seize that media. If you can get out there first and plant the idea in somebody's head, that's what they measure everything against. So I don't know how in the way we have things divided, if you're not watching, and that's really the background for this entire discussion, if you're not watching a variety of news sources, you are playing into whatever narrative the one you do watch is presenting. And if if it's Steve Bannon you're listening to, you're getting a distorted view of reality that's way out there. But I guess the problem with the narrative, as I see it, Dustin, is it's not a monolith. There's lots of different narratives, and you almost get to pick the one you want, like you pick a religion or something. You pick the one that sounds good to you.
Yeah. And I do like the comparing to see what they're omitting.
Mm-hmm.
I am not really on social media, but it's my understanding that a fundamental mechanism with social media is that it's going to amplify. It's going to steer you towards the voices that it thinks you want to hear. Mm-hmm. So once you pick that lane, you're bombarded with it,
right.
Which I think increases the danger of us getting stuck in one place.
Yeah. I think we were finding that out when we were listing or I found out when I was listing my social media. It's like, it was very difficult to get out of my lane on my feeds and all those things. Like, I'll go through cycles of resetting everything, and then it keeps veering off to a certain sensational, like the algorithm veers off to the more sensational stuff. Like, clean it all out, and then I'll get what I want. But I'm human, so every so often I'm going to click on a more clickbaity thing, and it just kind of it slowly drifts to the right. I'm like, what am I looking at now? And so, but I also found like it was when I started researching, okay, how do I go find a different perspective? In my own research of my own choosings, I'm like, it's very difficult for me right now to go find a different bubble. Like, how do I even, like, I wasn't able to do that. Like, I have to just watch Fox News all day long, and I'm not going to do that because it grates on my, like, when I started identifying my bubble, it was basically, once I picked my lane, how do I get out of my lane? I think that's an excellent point, because I don't know. I'm trying to find out.
No, Andrew, I think you're absolutely right about that. And there's a film called The Social Dilemma, which addresses this issue probably better than anything I've seen. And in that, many of the Silicon Valley leaders, people who have developed some of these platforms and the algorithms that run on the platform, discuss how they're deliberately doing this. And the example for me was we got a cat. I haven't had a cat in 25 years. The next day, I had 4 cat food ads on my Facebook feed. So it happens very quickly, and you can see it if you watch it. Understanding what they're doing to you is very important. But as some of the folks in that film I was talking about said, even though they wrote the algorithms, they were still susceptible to them. It's just like, the distiller can still be an alcoholic. You're making it for one reason, but it can still come back to hurt you.
Oh my goodness.
Gosh. Well, I guess the problem you have is that a lot of the stuff is necessary to have. I want water to come out of my faucet, thank you. And I want electricity to come out of the wall sockets, and I want my goddamn internet to work, thank you. So that I can find out about this stuff, because one of the consequences, I think, one of the consequences of this power shortage in Houston was that it took down the server that I had some websites on. I haven't confirmed that yet, but one particular cluster of server sites that I've had up there forever and ever and ever, and it's all up there, just went blank white. Bonk, nothing. This is HostGator. And I'm all over the map trying to figure out what's going on. Where is this at? Where is this at? And finally, after I had eliminated the ones that were working, it got to this, and it was like, yeah, HostGator, and a little line saying, oh, we're having difficulties, blah, 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 blah. I'm trying to get to you. And I'm like, oh, all right. At least I know, because the people whose website it was were all freaked out. What happened to the website? Yeah, I'm like, well, we just nothing. You just don't worry about it. All we can do is wait until they fix the damn thing, and then if there's something to be done with it, we'll do it. But can't do anything with it. It's out there it's out there. It exists. It's not under my control, even though I'm the one that puts that certain amount of content on there.
Dustin, before you move on, one example of the narrative that I wanted to sneak in here is right now related to what's going on in Texas and their power grid. The narrative is that government is the problem, socialism is evil. And so when you look at the situation there, private industry has been controlling the Texas power grid. So my solution is government takeover of the power grid and guarantee equity for everyone in terms of getting power. But that's socialism. Oh, well, socialism's bad, so we can't do that. We have a reaction to things. We're predisposed to be against that. It's what Bernie Sanders ran into all the time. He tried to popularize the term democratic socialism, but that wasn't going to work. It still had socialism in it. And there are people who are against socialism who don't even they have no idea what it is, but I'm against it, So that's another part of the narrative, that we make assumptions about things based on what we've been told, or maybe some example from the past. And so we don't want to go back and revisit that in any way. Well, that's a closed issue. Socialism's bad.
Yeah. I added that of like, it's the omission that we're not hearing. And once you hear the omission, because like socialism, if you're just talking about tyrannical authoritarianism in history, yeah, that's bad. But you didn't mention the ownership of the basic needs and all the other stuff.
You didn't mention Social Security, Medicare,
the
police department, the fire department, all of the things that are socialistic. You left those out.
I'm finding that when I'm watching other people observe one narrative, I'm like, well, it's obvious how you got to that conclusion, and I'm not blaming you. Like, obviously, if that was the only information I had too, I would come to that conclusion. Now, I haven't figured out how to way to say that in conversation that's not condescending, but I'm working on it.
It's
the thing about it is, Michael, with the power supply set up, even in Texas. I mean, Texas Power and Light was what was owned by. In fact, in the little bitty town I grew up in, they had a power supply system all by themselves for that one town. I mean, and of course it was forever going out because it was too much draw on the power lines. So that's when Texas Power and Light bought it, and they slowly expanded it, and everybody understood. Oh, this is how you got to do this to keep the system from collapsing, or we don't want the power to go out. So if we join together, which is what you have to do, the problem was when they said, "Oh, well, why don't we just let somebody corporate run it?" That was
Trust me, don't worry about it.
Yeah, we don't worry about it. It'll be cheaper, Well, it'll be cheaper. Well, it's not, and so that. But the people that live there are used to having the power on there and understand that there are reasons for it not being there now, unrelated to the fact that it's corporate or whatever, or capitalist or whatever. I mean, they're like, we don't care. Let's just get the power up here, and we have to. And of course, as we know, we have to count on some goddamn Republican politician in Texas to say, "Oh, I can fix it. I can fix it," and they can get. We can get because this is right down the Koch brothers barrel. I mean, that's just what they do, and so I'm sure they've already got the place flooded. All of the politicians are already on their dime anyway. So they've been in there saying, okay, this is what we got to do in order to keep everybody being all bent out of shape about it. because we don't want that to happen. Everybody's got to have power. We agree with you there, no problem whatsoever. We just, we'll have a solution for you shortly.
Right.
That's
Andrew, you
that's Toll Brothers.
should jump in there on something.
Yeah, well, I think what Paul was just explaining speaks to it. The narrative is a story, and Michael, like you said, who gets out of the gate first often controls the thread. But yeah, who has the power to be the storyteller? And that's what I've been reckoning with a lot personally, is as I have worked more and more in African American communities, realizing the cost of a small subset, white males, getting to be the storytellers, to control the narrative for a long time has screwed all of us. But certainly some groups a lot more than others. So just being aware, Dustin, that question, that being able to have folks think about, so who has the power to tell you this story? Who's controlling this story that you're listening to? Because there are other people you can listen to.
Yeah.
There's other stories out there.
If the corporations were owning and controlling everything, but they were taking care of my basic welfare, I'd let them. I would hope, I would honestly say, no, that's still wrong. But if they were providing for basic needs and making an obscene profit, I'd probably let them. It's when they stop. It's when they dominate that story and like, well, no, it has to be this way. Then I'm like, no, I want to listen to somebody else, because once you've made it a physical threat to me, the conversation changes. Yeah. So.
Yes. Watching the people, watching them run by and talking to people in line to get water from their cars. And, practically all of them are like, if we just go to the moon, why in the hell can't we take care of this? Over and over and over, these people are condemning the power system for failing to do this, when they know very well that across the river in Louisiana, the power's up. Oklahoma's doing okay. Oh, I don't know if Oklahoma may not be. They may be connected to the tower, to the Texas system, because of course this Texas system is a little bit more than just Texas. They have, they can buy a little extra here and help them out. They're always. There are those little, perhaps New Mexico might be on that list. I don't know. Of course, now you have to go check, right? And that's what I'll have to do, because I just said something I don't know for an absolute fact to be true. So I'll go and confirm that. But
one narrative I would like to promote is the narrative that we live in a society where when something goes wrong, corporations rely on the people.
Yep.
People don't rely on the corporations. When we had the financial crisis, we bailed the banks out, but they didn't bail us out. It's fine, Dustin, if they're taking care of us and we take care of them in return. Yeah, I could live with that. But we take care of them and they don't give a damn about it.
Right.
And I think in Texas, Paul, what is really at the heart of the problem is there was a great picture of Houston, the skyline of Houston with all the buildings and bright lights, and the neighborhoods in front of them completely in the dark. And I think that was the icon for what happened. The power company really provided up-to-date infrastructure for those big high rises, but the neighborhoods, they didn't care. Same was true in New Orleans during the hurricane. It's the poor people always get shit on. So that's the dark underbelly of allowing corporations to take over. I'm curious as to what is going to come out of this pandemic when we have pumped a whole lot of money into Pfizer and others. Some people may be hurting from this pandemic, but Pfizer sure as hell isn't.
Right.
Oh, yeah, as they are.
Oh, don't get me started on that.
Yeah, me either. I will go straight to as soon as I can get to the vaccination plan. I'll get it. Just turn my thigh, thank you. And nobody has said anything. I haven't heard anybody talk about, well, who's paying for all this stuff? I don't hear them saying, well, the government's picking up the tab. Okay, well, that's fine. That's perhaps what we should do. We don't leave anybody out.
Yeah. Well, mine was big. Was I was watching the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, a thing on that. Of course, they've been paying my salary for years now, indirectly, and it was about having an open source vaccine to help third world countries, basically, and they threatened their funding of the vaccine manufacturer, whatever, to not do that, because if they could privatize the vaccine, then the funds that go into the Bill and Melinda Gates Fund that they then give out, those get affected. So it's like, that's how Bill Gates made $10 billion off the vaccine or whatever. He was like, he could, like, people were trying to get him to do open source. So when you don't do that, that means
Bill Gates is not going to do open source anything.
Right. Well, that's true. But it's like the third, like, if it's $5 here for a vaccine, it's $60 over in Nigeria or whatever. It's anything like that. I forgot what the thing is. So that means that while the white world can get a vaccine, the non-white world is going to not. And so the disease is going to be around forever. They're like, this is one of those things where you can actually speak in pure dollar terms. Just like, hey, rich person, you could make a short-term gain right now, but you are going to have a definite long-term loss. Of course, they don't give a shit about that either. When are they going to start caring about long-term losses? Their own, though. This is different. Like,
yeah.
I know we've got just a few minutes left, or actually just a couple minutes left. So I'll kind of skip over these last questions. This was about a carrot versus stick framework, but kind of what the one thing I noticed the corporations did do for us is, because Congress couldn't do anything to Trump, but Facebook and Twitter could, and they did. Mm-hmm. That was an interesting thing where they actually did it. Not us, not politics. The corporations gave a stick. Yeah. So I'm going to rephrase this real quick and we can close out on, in Texas, we understand the carrot is going to be about municipal utilities and those kind of things. What is a stick we would do to the people in Texas? What was a stick as a leftist? I understand making a more equitable playing field. I understand providing basic utility owners, all the stuff on the left about the proactive things we can do. What is on the left in Texas? What is a stick you would use against these Enron shit fucks?
That's a mighty good question there, white guy.
I'm not sure if I'm interpreting that the right way, but
you are.
I think what's going to happen is Texas is going to have to abandon its standalone policy, at least on the power grid. I don't know. I can't speak to the water problem there, Paul. And I know water is a big issue throughout the West, but as far as their power grid, they are not on the national power grid. There's two main national power grids, and they're not on either one of them. They're independent. I think that's going to come to an end. And the quid pro quo is going to have to be that they submit themselves to government regulation, federal regulations regarding how they maintain their infrastructure.
Yep.
Weatherizing them for one thing, but also some sort of equitable distribution. So I think, just like every other collapse system, when they collapse, they got to go to the government for help. With government means you and me. So we're going to end up paying for Texas's problem one way or another. And I don't know if that's, the carrot is we'll bail you out when you have a problem. The stick is you got to do.
We won't. Yeah.